In 1974, 18-year-old Debbie Stone was hired to work at Disneyland in Anaheim, California. Her specific role was to be a hostess at a brand new attraction called America Sings. Disney had basically converted an old carousel into a rotating stage, and they put up partition walls all along to create 6 distinct stages. And so on each of these 6 stages were different sets of these robotic animals that played different songs about America. You would walk into this theater that looked like a single theater with one stage, but really what you were looking at is one of the 6 stages. And so the audience would sit down, they would see one of the acts, and then the stage would rotate. Debbie's job was at the beginning of these shows, she would go up before the very first act and she would greet the audience. And then the show would start, it would filter through all 6 of the stages, and then Debbie would get back on stage and she would say goodbye. And so on July 9th of that year, which was 9 days after this attraction had opened, she greeted the audience and the show began. And then after the 6th act was done, Debbie said goodbye to the audience. And then as that audience was leaving the theater, she turned around and walked towards the back of the stage she was on. Each of the 6 stages had a fairly tall back wall, and behind was the center of the actual attraction, and in the center was this circular, fairly tall storage room. This storage room did not rotate, and the gap between the outside of the storage room and the back of any of these back walls was only a few inches, but it was big enough that a person in theory could get stuck back there. After Debbie has said goodbye to the audience, she decides to move to the adjoining stage. And when she does that, she either trips or something happens which causes her to fall into the narrow space between the 2 back walls of the 2 stages she was on, and then gets wedged between the outside of the storage room and the back of one of the back walls. And so she starts to panic and she starts screaming for help. None of the staff hear her, and anyone that actually did hear her calling for help, they would later say they thought it was part of the show. These stages, they start to move because the show is going to start. She got forcibly dragged and twisted and rolled, and her body began to contort and bones started to break. Debbie didn't die. She was grievously injured. 2 to 4 minutes later, when the act was complete, the stage began to rotate again. And so Debbie again is rolled and contorted and crushed and dragged, and she's still not dead. And then finally, at the end of the show, when one of the audience members alerted the staff, and at that point they went for a look, and they discovered Debbie, and she was very obviously deceased. Disney would pay a small settlement to Debbie's family, and then they would put up a number of safeguards on the America Sings attraction to make sure something like this never happened again.